Pam Bondi thought she could control the hidden secrets of the Epstein empire, but a bipartisan subpoena has just flipped the script on the former Attorney General.
Domestically now, we've seen lawmakers late today vote to subpoena the Attorney General for the way her department has handled the Jeffrey Epstein investigation. You saw a handful of Republicans, right, so people in the president's own party, joining Democrats on the House Oversight Committee to vote to bring Pam Bondi in, including Nancy Mace, the congresswoman on the Republican side. Watch this.
I have a lot more questions, and I don't expect to be talking about the stock market, so she better not bring those notes when she comes to the Oversight Committee.
That's a reference to the previous questioning that Bondi went through just some weeks ago in front of a different House committee on this very thing, where you see here survivors of Jeffrey Epstein's abuse stood. They were in the audience. They were wearing shirts that talked about releasing the files. Let me bring in Ryan Nobles, who's live for us on Capitol Hill. So this is interesting. This is a real sort of shot across the bow to the White House, to the Department of Justice, that they're subpoenaing now Pam Bondi, Ryan.
Yeah, and it's really born out of a sense of frustration from the members of Congress who are specifically interested in getting to the bottom of the Epstein controversy, that the Department of Justice is just not complying with the Epstein Transparency Act, which requires them to release every file available to the public as it relates to the Epstein file, and that they're only allowed to redact things if they're part of an ongoing investigation or to protect the identities or personal information of survivors. And members of Congress like Nancy Mace have felt that the Department of Justice has been way too heavy-handed with their redactions, that their redactions are inconsistent, that there are names like Les Wexner's name, for instance, the business partner of Jeffrey Epstein, an alleged co-conspirator. His name was redacted at one point, but then there are examples of survivors whose names have not been redacted. And they feel as though the Department of Justice has just not been forthcoming enough about why certain things have been redacted and how other things have slipped through the cracks. And so they want Pam Bondi to come in front of the committee, ask her about specific files, specific pieces of information, and try and understand this process as to why they have not been able to fully comply with this. And I would imagine as well, Hallie, that there's going to be questions about the fact that there's some 3 million files that the Department of Justice has just said we have in our possession, but we're just not going to release those to the public for whatever reason. So there's a lot of tough questions that Pam Bondi could get from this committee.
When you talk about the files, when you talk about the documents, there's an interesting sort of development today, first reported by the Wall Street Journal, that the Department of Justice now is confirming that it's got something like 40,000 plus documents that it's sort of re-reviewing, right, that are not out because they're looking at them.
Right. And the Department of Justice said in a statement today that this is part of the process, that they put this stuff out as quickly as they possibly could, that some redactions and errors that shouldn't have happened or should have happened slipped through the cracks. And so therefore, they're going to bring back some stuff. They say the department has not deleted any files from the library. In compliance with the EFTA, our team is working around the clock to address victims' concerns, redact personally identifiable information and any images of a sexual nature. So they did admit there's some close to 50,000 files as of March 2nd that were offline for further review. Now, according to the Wall Street Journal report, among those files, Hallie, were specific allegations against Donald Trump, which, of course, has raised questions because this is not the first time that allegations against Trump have been taken off the website and then eventually put back up. So we'll have to see if those files ever reemerge, Hallie.
And then when you talk about, the questions that they want to ask the Attorney General Pam Bondi, there's also kind of a new crop of people who they're asking to question, including Bill Gates, including Clinton confidant Doug Band and others, right?
Yeah, and Kathy Rumler, the former Obama White House counsel. And then the other big name is Howard Lutnick, the Commerce Secretary, who you and I have talked about a lot. He's agreed to come and testify. Now, what's interesting about this round of the Gates, Rumler, Black, Groff, these are all individuals who right now the committee is asking to come in voluntarily. They're not formal subpoenas yet. And if you're a witness and you're being asked to come in voluntarily, that does give you a degree of negotiating power. You can say, I'll come in, but only if you ask me about X, Y, and Z, or I'll come in under these certain conditions. As soon as it moves to a subpoena, then it becomes more difficult and the committee is less inclined to meet your needs, especially if you're not a former president of the United States like Bill Clinton. So it'll be interesting to see, especially someone like Bill Gates, who's very powerful, has very good lawyers, how he handles this. So far, he's not responded directly to this request, but I would be very surprised if any of the folks on this.
Right now in Washington, a dramatic reversal of power is unfolding. Lawmakers have officially voted to subpoena the former Attorney General for her department's highly controversial handling of the Jeffrey Epstein investigation files. This is not just a partisan maneuver. A handful of Republicans, members of the president's own party, have joined Democrats on the House Oversight Committee. They voted to bring Pam Bondi in to testify. Representatives like Nancy Mace on the Republican side have made their positions remarkably clear. They have a lot of pressing questions, and they are demanding real answers. This legislative action directly references the contentious questioning Bondi faced just weeks ago. During that previous hearing, survivors of the exploitation network stood in the audience. They wore shirts demanding the release of the unredacted files. Now, a shot across the bow has been fired directly at the Department of Justice. The subpoena of Pam Bondi is a reality. This action is born out of a profound sense of congressional frustration. Members of Congress are determined to get to the bottom of the Epstein controversy. They feel the Department of Justice is actively defying the Epstein Transparency Act. This specific law requires the government to release every available file to the public, yet the situation remains obstructed. In early 2026, Pam Bondi faced a closed-door transcribed interview regarding her handling of these explosive documentary records. It was a moment of absolute dramatic reversal. The tables had suddenly turned on a political figure who spent years wielding immense power and controlling public narratives. The trajectory of this confrontation is perfect for political theater, but its implications are deadly serious. Bondi was selected for the Attorney General position precisely because of her documented loyalty to Donald Trump. She demonstrated a clear willingness to defend him through impeachment proceedings. She showed deep comfort with using the powers of the nation's top law enforcement agency to serve his specific interests. Because of this loyalty, she was handed control over the most volatile and politically dangerous body of evidence in modern American legal history. She became the guardian of nearly 3 million pages of Epstein-related materials. These files had been the subject of years of intense public demand, congressional pressure, and bitter legal battles. Then, in a critical sequence of executive decisions that would ultimately destroy her political standing, Bondi made specific choices. She chose what to release. She chose what to redact. She decided who received access to carefully curated binders of material and who was kept entirely in the dark. Those deliberate choices have now placed her directly in the crosshairs of a massive congressional investigation. Lawmakers are asking the most uncomfortable questions imaginable. They want to know whether she managed those documents in the true public interest or exclusively in the private interest of the man who appointed her. The moment of maximum political vulnerability arrived during a February 2026 congressional hearing. It produced one of the most stunning admissions in recent political memory. Under direct and relentless questioning from lawmakers who had reviewed parts of the files, Bondi acknowledged a staggering fact. She admitted that Donald Trump's name appears in the documents countless times. Those two exact words, countless times, hung in the hearing room with immense physical weight. The Attorney General, who had been entrusted with managing the release of these sensitive materials, who had been chosen specifically for her personal loyalty to Trump, was now admitting this on the official record. The man she had been actively protecting was named throughout the documentary record of one of the most extensive illicit networks in American history. This admission was politically damaging, but more importantly, it was legally consequential. It created a permanent congressional record of exactly what Bondi knew and what she actively chose to acknowledge under oath. Lawmakers are pointing out severe inconsistencies in how the law has been applied. The Department of Justice is only allowed to redact information if it is part of an ongoing investigation or to protect the identities of innocent survivors. However, members of Congress feel the department has been entirely too heavy-handed. The redactions are completely inconsistent. The name of Les Wexner, a business partner and alleged co-conspirator, was heavily redacted at one point. Yet there are glaring examples of survivors whose names were left completely exposed. The Oversight Committee feels the Department of Justice has been fundamentally untruthful about why certain things were hidden and how other sensitive things slipped through the cracks. They want Pam Bondi to sit in front of the committee to explain this broken process. They want to ask her about specific files. They demand to know why the department has failed to fully comply with the transparency law. There are going to be aggressive questions regarding the 3 million files the department currently holds. The DOJ has essentially told the public, we have these files in our possession, but we are just not going to release them. That stance is no longer acceptable to the committee. Adding fuel to the fire, there is a major development reported by the Wall Street Journal. The Department of Justice now confirms it has over 40,000 documents that it is currently re-reviewing. These files have been pulled offline. The department claims this is just part of the administrative process. They argue they released the materials as quickly as possible and that some redaction errors simply slipped through the cracks. Therefore, they are pulling massive amounts of data back for further review. The DOJ released a statement claiming they have not deleted any files from the library. They insist their team is working around the clock to address victim concerns and redact personally identifiable information. However, they admitted that close to 50,000 files were offline for further review as of early March. According to the reporting, among those pulled files were specific allegations against Donald Trump. This revelation has raised massive questions. This is not the first time that allegations against the former president have been quietly taken off the website, only to be eventually put back up. The public is left waiting to see if those specific files ever reemerge. While the focus remains intensely on Pam Bondi, a new crop of high-profile figures is being asked to answer questions. The committee is seeking testimony from prominent individuals. This list includes Bill Gates, Clinton confidant Doug Band, former Obama White House counsel Kathy Ruemmler, and Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick. These individuals are currently being asked to come in voluntarily. They are not under formal subpoenas just yet. When a witness is asked to testify voluntarily, they hold a degree of negotiating power. They can dictate certain conditions or limit the scope of the questioning. But as soon as the process moves to a formal subpoena, that leverage vanishes. The committee becomes far less inclined to meet their demands. It will be fascinating to watch how highly powerful figures with elite legal teams like Bill Gates handle these requests. But the admission regarding Trump's countless appearances was only the most visible fraction of a much larger scandal. This controversy had been quietly building for months behind closed doors. The broader outrage centered entirely on Bondi's specific executive decisions during her tenure. She was given absolute control over materials accumulated through years of federal investigations into an international trafficking operation. These records included extensive documentation of relationships with powerful figures across multiple industries, multiple countries, and multiple decades of American social life. The Transparency Act mandated the release of a staggering volume of evidence. The cache included more than 2,000 videos and 180,000 images. It was a volume of material so massive and so potentially explosive that Washington had been holding its breath for years. The Transparency Act itself was a direct legislative rebuke to Bondi's management style. Congress was forced to pass a specific law compelling the Department of Justice to release these materials over the administration's fierce objections. A legislative override of that magnitude is exceptionally rare in our current polarized political environment. The fact that Congress had to pass a federal law to compel the release of documents the public had demanded for years is the ultimate measure of Bondi's failure as a guardian of justice. She actively resisted full disclosure. She managed the release in ways that Congress and victim advocates found deeply insulting. The decisions she made generated immediate and sustained bipartisan controversy. But the single most damaging revelation, the one that transformed Bondi from a stubborn official into the subject of a severe congressional probe, was her selective sharing of evidence. Reports emerged that Bondi had secretly provided curated binders of Epstein documents to conservative media figures and White House influencers. While internet personalities were given exclusive access, elected members of Congress exercising their constitutional oversight functions were kept aggressively at arm's length. This specific revelation created a bipartisan reaction of utter outrage. The Epstein file question had previously been treated by some as a purely one-sided political game. Democrats pressed for disclosure while Republicans protected the administration. But the revelation that Bondi was selectively arming conservative allies with curated materials completely changed the political dynamic. It proved the documents were being weaponized. Then came the development that transformed this from a dispute over document release into a genuine constitutional confrontation. The Department of Justice was actively monitoring congressional access to the unredacted files. Reports confirm that Bondi's office maintained specific records of which members of Congress accessed which parts of the database. The Attorney General of the United States was actively tracking the reading habits of federal legislators who were simply trying to do their jobs. The response from Capitol Hill was immediate and furious. Lawmakers used the exact word this situation warranted. They called it spying. The constitutional implications of the executive branch tracking the reading activities of individual legislators are profound. Congressional oversight entirely depends on lawmakers being able to review government documents freely. If the executive branch monitors which documents they are looking at to draw inferences about their investigative strategies, it is an egregious violation of the separation of powers. Executive surveillance of legislative conduct threatens the very foundation of an independent Congress. This explains the House Oversight Committee's historic vote. The decision to formally summon Bondi was a 24-19 vote. 5 Republicans deliberately crossed party lines to join the Democrats. This is a clear measure of how politically untenable Bondi's position had become. Getting 5 Republican votes against a Trump-appointed official in the current political environment is virtually impossible. It requires the conduct in question to be so undeniably severe that Republican members calculate their institutional obligations outweigh the extreme political cost of defying their party. 5 Republicans reached that exact calculation. They concluded that Bondi's specific actions warranted forcing her to answer questions under a formal federal subpoena. This bipartisan vote signaled that her conduct had crossed a line that even her most loyal allies could no longer defend. Bondi eventually agreed to a closed-door transcribed interview. She did so only after facing the legitimate threat of a civil contempt vote. This closed-door setting represents a crucial accountability mechanism. It is less visible than a public hearing, but it is far more consequential for the permanent factual record. In a transcribed interview, the witness must answer questions under oath with a federal court reporter present. The transcript immediately becomes part of the official congressional record. The witness cannot manage their public image through carefully crafted sound bites or political grandstanding. They cannot play to the television camera. They are forced to provide specific answers to specific factual questions in a legally binding environment. Bondi's forced participation means there is now a sealed congressional record of her actions. She had to explain exactly what she did with the files, why she made the specific redaction decisions, and what she knew about the unconstitutional surveillance of congressional members. That sealed record is highly dangerous for her future. It was given under strict conditions designed to extract the truth rather than facilitate a political performance. The sheer nature of these files makes the question of their management extraordinarily critical. The released pages represent an evidentiary record of horrific magnitude. The thousands of videos and images are not mere administrative paperwork. They are the concrete documentation of specific crimes committed against specific victims. When lawmakers state that the files contain horrific material, they are not engaging in standard political hyperbole. They are accurately describing the darkest elements of human exploitation. The overarching question remains: were these files managed in the interest of the victims or in the interest of the powerful men whose names echo throughout the record? This question has direct implications for both legal accountability and basic human dignity. In her prepared remarks, Bondi claimed her tenure represented an unprecedented commitment to transparency. She argued that releasing millions of pages was evidence of her good faith. But that argument completely collapses under scrutiny. Releasing a large volume of irrelevant documents does not constitute transparency if the most critical evidence is deliberately withheld. The congressional investigation is pressing hard on the specific justification for every single redaction. They want to know if names were hidden for legitimate national security reasons or simply to protect powerful political figures. The initial claims about a supposed client list that were later walked back, combined with the spying allegations, paint a very dark picture. It looks entirely like a document management process designed to actively shape a political narrative. The 5 Republican votes on the subpoena deserve intense historical examination. They represent a massive fracture in the protective wall that the party normally provides to the administration. These members recognized a specific and personal threat. If the Attorney General was willing to spy on their reading habits, their own independence was at risk. The selective sharing of evidence with right-wing influencers further alienated these committee members. Why should internet commentators receive sensitive briefings while elected officials are treated like hostile adversaries? The combination of these grievances created a rare political opening for genuine bipartisan accountability. We must also carefully analyze the revelation regarding Donald Trump. The presence of a name in an investigative file does not automatically prove criminal conduct. People appear in federal files as witnesses or tangential contacts all the time. However, the specific word countless changes the equation entirely. An admission that a name appears countless times is not the description of a peripheral presence. It strongly suggests a deeply established pattern of documented connections. It implies a relationship extensive enough that the Attorney General herself could not characterize it more precisely. Determining the exact nature of those countless appearances is exactly what this investigation is designed to achieve. The broader significance of the Pam Bondi investigation extends far beyond the Epstein controversy. It asks a fundamental democratic question. What happens when the person responsible for administering justice requires accountability themselves? The Attorney General is supposed to be the nation's supreme law enforcement official. Their institutional role is to ensure the law applies equally to the powerful and the powerless. When that official uses their prosecutorial discretion to protect a specific leader while monitoring the legislator's task with overseeing her, the entire justice system is turned upside down. This congressional probe is the institutional correction to that dangerous inversion. It is the democratic system desperately attempting to restore balance. Putting a personally loyal official in charge of an independent Justice Department predictably disrupted the balance of power. The dynamics unfolding in this controversy reveal exactly how power operates in the modern era. Institutional loyalty is rewarded with absolute control over sensitive information. That control is then weaponized to protect the elite while keeping the American public entirely in the dark, but the empire is striking back. Bondi now faces investigators who control the flow of information. She is sitting across the table from people asking questions she can no longer deflect. What makes this investigation so historically significant is how it combines multiple catastrophic failures into one cohesive narrative. There is the total failure of transparency, there is the failure of impartiality, there is the massive failure of institutional integrity regarding the surveillance of Congress, and finally, there is the failure of personal honesty. All of these failures are now being rigorously examined under oath. This investigation has already produced permanent factual findings. The admission regarding the countless appearances of Trump's name cannot be erased. The evidence of selective sharing with media allies is fully documented. The spying allegation has not been effectively denied. The bipartisan subpoena is a permanent matter of public record. These are not passing political rumors. They are established historical facts about the conduct of the person who managed the most sensitive documentary record in federal custody. Bondi's legal danger is now acute. She is no longer the Attorney General. She has been stripped of the powerful institutional protection that the Department of Justice provides. She can no longer dictate what documents Congress receives. She is now simply a private citizen answering questions in a room where inconsistencies between her public statements and private testimony carry severe legal penalties. The accountability she faces is not just a political headache. It translates directly into personal legal liability. Using official government powers to monitor legislators and manage document releases for private political gain is the exact type of conduct that leads to formal legal consequences. The public still demands to know if the 3 million pages represent the complete truth. Are there additional victim statements or hidden financial documents that connect specific powerful individuals to these illicit operations? Were they redacted to serve political interests rather than the law? This specific question will determine whether the victims ever receive the closure they have sought for decades. Bondi was originally the shield. She was installed to manage explosive information in a way that protected specific interests. She made executive decisions shaped entirely by that protective function. But being removed from office did not end her exposure. It merely removed her armor. She is now subject to the full, devastating force of congressional oversight. The files have been handed over, albeit incompletely. The investigation into how they were managed is the most critical accountability proceeding currently underway in Washington. The system designed to check the abuse of power is finally functioning. Congress is using its constitutional authority to demand answers. Partisan loyalties have been temporarily overcome by the sheer weight of the misconduct. Bondi's rapid trajectory from the ultimate guardian of secrets to the primary subject of a federal probe proves that accountability can still exist in a deeply polarized environment. The horrific contents of the files demand nothing less than absolute truth. What happens next will depend entirely on the upcoming document releases, the sworn testimony, and whether the American public maintains the focus required to see this through to the end.